The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Priscilla Stanton's wagon as the wheel cracked and splintered beneath her, sending her hopes of reaching Eagle Pass crashing into the desert dust. It was the summer of 1878, and as the 23-year-old schoolteacher watched her last chance of independence disappear with the broken wheel, she wondered if this barren landscape would be the last thing she ever saw. Priscilla wiped the sweat from her brow, her once neat brown hair falling in loose tendrils around her face. The journey from Boston had been arduous enough, but now, stranded in the unforgiving Sonoran desert with dwindling water supplies, she faced a far more immediate threat than failing in her teaching endeavor. "Come on," she muttered to herself, bending to inspect the damage. The wooden wheel had split completely, the iron rim bent at an impossible angle. Her knowledge of wagon repairs was non-existent, and her tools even more so. The nearest town was still miles away, and her water barrel was down to its last few inches. The relentless heat made her dizzy as she sought shelter under the canvas cover of her wagon. She had left Boston with such grand ambitions to start anew in the West, to escape the suffocating expectations of her family, to become the schoolteacher Eagle Pass so desperately needed. Now, she might not even make it there alive. As the afternoon stretched on, Priscilla rationed her water, taking only small sips to quench her parched throat. The desert was silent except for the occasional cry of a distant hawk. She had read about the dangers of the West in her dime novels, but the reality was far more terrifying than any printed word could convey. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon when Priscilla heard the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. Hope flared in her chest. Scrambling from beneath the wagon, she shielded her eyes against the glaring sun. A silhouetted figure approached on horseback, the dust cloud behind him suggesting he was riding at a steady pace. As he drew closer, Priscilla could make out a tall man atop a chestnut horse. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could see the outline of a strong jaw and the glint of a sheriff's badge on his chest. The rider slowed as he approached, his keen eyes taking in her predicament. He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. Standing before her, he removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and the most piercing blue eyes she had ever seen. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "looks like you've had some trouble." Priscilla straightened her spine, determined to maintain some dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "The wheel broke several hours ago. I'm afraid I have no means to repair it." The man crouched down to examine the damage, his tanned hand running along the splintered wood. "This wagon isn't going anywhere without a new wheel." He stood and faced her. "I'm Yates Monroe, sheriff of Eagle Pass." "Priscilla Stanton," she replied. "I was on my way to Eagle Pass. I'm the new schoolteacher." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "We've been expecting you, Miss Stanton. Town council's been talking about your arrival for weeks now." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Priscilla. "Well, it seems they may have to wait a bit longer, or perhaps indefinitely if I can't find a way out of this predicament." Sheriff Monroe glanced at the setting sun, then back at her. "Night's coming. Temperature drops fast out here." He paused, seeming to weigh his options. "Let me take you home." "Home?" Priscilla questioned, confused. "To Eagle Pass," he clarified, a slight smile softening his weathered features. "We can send someone back for your belongings tomorrow." Priscilla hesitated. She had been raised to be cautious, especially around men she didn't know, but she was also practical enough to recognize that her options were limited. Die of thirst in the desert or trust this sheriff to take her to safety? "I would be most grateful, Sheriff Monroe," she finally said. "Just Yates is fine," he replied, securing her trunk to his horse. Can't leave the town's new schoolteacher to perish in the desert now, can I?" With practiced ease, he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The closeness was improper by Boston standards, but Priscilla found that propriety seemed less important when survival was at stake. As they rode away from her abandoned wagon, Priscilla felt a strange mix of trepidation and relief. The desert landscape gradually changed as they made their way toward Eagle Pass, the terrain becoming slightly less harsh, with occasional clusters of saguaro cactus and mesquite trees breaking the monotony. "How much farther?" she asked after they had been riding for nearly an hour. "About another hour," Yates replied, his voice close to her ear. "Town's nestled in a valley just beyond that ridge. There's a creek that runs through it year-round, makes it one of the few hospitable places in this stretch of desert." Priscilla nodded, trying to ignore how aware she was of his chest against her back, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he guided the horse. She had never been this close to a man who wasn't family, and she found it both unsettling and oddly comforting. "What brings a Boston lady all the way to Arizona territory?" Yates asked, breaking the silence. Priscilla considered how to answer. The full truth was complicated and personal. "I wanted adventure," she said simply, "and the opportunity to make a difference. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Eagle Pass, it seemed like fate." Yates chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Well, you've certainly found adventure already. Not many survive a broken wagon in the Sonoran." "I suppose I have you to thank for that," she admitted. "Just doing my job, Miss Stanton." As they crested a small hill, Priscilla caught her first glimpse of Eagle Pass in the distance. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a shallow valley with mountains rising in the distance. A creek glittered in the fading light, and lanterns were beginning to be lit in windows as dusk approached. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her weariness momentarily forgotten. "It's home," Yates said simply, but there was pride in his voice. By the time they reached the edge of town, darkness had fallen completely. The streets were quiet, with only a few people still moving about. Curious eyes followed them as Yates guided his horse down the main street, past the general store, the saloon, and what looked like a small church. "Where will I stay?" Priscilla suddenly realized she hadn't considered this detail. "Mrs. Holloway runs the boarding house," Yates explained. "We've arranged a room for you there until you get settled." He stopped in front of a two-story building with a small porch. The sign above the door read Holloway's Boarding House in faded paint. As they dismounted, the door opened to reveal a plump woman with gray hair piled atop her head. "Sheriff Monroe, is that our new teacher?" she called out, her voice carrying in the quiet night. "Yes, madam," Yates replied. Miss Stanton had some trouble on the road. Her wagon broke down about 15 miles east. "I'll organize a party to retrieve her belongings tomorrow." Mrs. Holloway bustled down the steps, clucking sympathetically. "You poor dear, come in, come in. You must be exhausted and half-starved." Priscilla found herself swept into the boarding house before she could properly thank Yates for his rescue. She glanced back to see him tipping his hat to her before turning to lead his horse away. The boarding house was warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Mrs. Holloway led her to a small but clean room on the second floor, chattering all the way about how excited the town was to finally have a proper teacher. "The children have been learning from whoever could spare the time," she explained. "But we've been saving for a schoolhouse and a real teacher for years." After a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and surprisingly tender beef, Priscilla finally found herself alone in her room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had nearly died in the desert, only to be rescued by a handsome sheriff who had brought her to this tiny frontier town that was now meant to be her home. It was nothing like the genteel society of Boston, but as Priscilla drifted off to sleep, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if she had finally found where she belonged. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Priscilla woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town coming to life, the distant lowing of cattle, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, voices calling greetings to one another on the street below. After washing her face in the basin provided, she changed into her last clean dress, a simple blue cotton that had fared better than most during the journey. She would need to retrieve her belongings soon, or she'd have nothing to wear to meet her new students. Mrs. Holloway greeted her with a beaming smile and a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Eat up, dear. Sheriff Monroe is already organizing men to fetch your wagon." "He is?" Priscilla was surprised and touched by his efficiency. "Oh, yes. Rode out at dawn with Mr. Peterson and the Miller boys. Said they'd be back by midday." True to his word, Yates returned shortly after noon, leading a wagon loaded with Priscilla's trunk and other belongings. She watched from the boarding house porch as he directed the men where to unload her things. He noticed her watching and approached, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "Everything seems intact, Miss Stanton. Unfortunately, your wagon was beyond repair. The axle was cracked as well as the wheel." "Thank you for retrieving my things," she said sincerely. "I don't know how I would have managed without them." Yates nodded, shifting his weight slightly. "Mayor Thompson would like to meet you this afternoon if you're feeling up to it. The schoolhouse needs some final touches, but he's hoping you can start classes next Monday." Priscilla nodded. "Of course. I'm eager to begin." "I can take you there at 3 if that suits," he offered, and Priscilla couldn't help but notice how his blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he spoke. "That would be fine, Sheriff Monroe." "Yates," he reminded her with a small smile. "I'll return at 3. The meeting with Mayor Thompson was brief but productive. A short, enthusiastic man with an impressive mustache, he proudly showed Priscilla the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn benches and a small teacher's desk at the front. "We've got 32 children of school age," he explained. "Ages 6 to 16. Most haven't had much formal education, but they're eager to learn." Priscilla surveyed the room, already mentally arranging lessons and schedules. "It's a good space," she said approvingly. "With some maps and books, it will be perfect." The mayor beamed. "We ordered supplies from back east. Should arrive on next week's stage." Throughout the tour, Yates remained a quiet presence, standing by the door with his hat in his hands. Priscilla found herself occasionally glancing his way, curious about this man who had saved her life so matter-of-factly. As they walked back toward the boarding house, the mayor having hurried off to another appointment, Priscilla found herself alone with Yates for the first time since their desert encounter. "Thank you for the escort, Sheriff Yates," she corrected herself. "My pleasure, Miss Stanton." He paused, seeming to hesitate before continuing. "Eagle Pass might not be what you're used to coming from Boston, but it's a good town with good people." "It already feels more welcoming than I expected," she admitted. "We're having a town social on Saturday," Yates said abruptly. "Sort of a welcome for you. Nothing fancy, just some music and dancing at the town hall." Priscilla smiled at his awkward invitation. "That sounds lovely. I look forward to meeting everyone." They reached the boarding house and Yates tipped his hat in farewell. "Until Saturday then, Miss Stanton." Watching him walk away, Priscilla felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Interest, curiosity. Whatever it was, she found herself looking forward to Saturday more than she cared to admit. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity, as Priscilla prepared for her first day of teaching. She organized her few educational materials, planned lessons for students of varying ages and abilities, and tried to learn as much as she could about Eagle Pass and its inhabitants. Mrs. Holloway proved an invaluable source of information, happy to share the town's history over tea and biscuits. Eagle Pass was just a trading post when I arrived with my late husband 20 years ago, she explained. Named for the eagles that nest in the cliffs east of town. Growth was slow until they found silver in the mountains in '65. Never a big strike like some places, but enough to bring folks looking for work. And Sheriff Monroe, Priscilla asked, trying to sound casual. Has he been here long? Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled knowingly. Yates. He came as a boy with his father after the war. His pa was the sheriff before him, died in a shootout with cattle rustlers 5 years back. Yates took up the badge the next day. Priscilla absorbed this information, building a clearer picture of the man who had rescued her. He seems capable. Best sheriff in the territory, Mrs. Holloway declared proudly. Keeps the peace without much bloodshed, which is rare enough these days. Saturday arrived, and Priscilla found herself spending more time than usual on her appearance. She selected her best dress, a deep green with modest lace at the collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in a style that was neat, but not overly formal. The town hall was already buzzing with activity when she arrived, escorted by Mrs. Holloway. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space. A small group of musicians played in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined another wall. Mayor Thompson spotted her immediately and hurried over. Miss Stanton, welcome, welcome. He turned to the room and raised his voice. Everyone, our new school teacher has arrived. Conversations paused as all eyes turned to Priscilla. She felt her cheeks warm under the attention but managed a composed smile. Thank you all for such a warm welcome, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. I'm very much looking forward to getting to know everyone, especially my future students. This seemed to break the ice, and soon she was surrounded by townspeople eager to introduce themselves. Parents proudly presented children who would be in her class. Merchants offered discounts at their stores, and several young, unmarried men seemed particularly interested in making her acquaintance. Through it all, Priscilla was acutely aware of Yates's presence across the room. He stood by the door, as seemed to be his habit, keeping a watchful eye on proceedings. Unlike their previous encounters, he was dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest, though his sheriff's badge still gleamed on his chest. It was nearly an hour before they found themselves face to face. The crowd around Priscilla had momentarily dispersed, and she took the opportunity to approach him. Good evening, Sheriff, she greeted him. His smile was brief but genuine. Miss Stanton, are you enjoying the celebration? Very much. Everyone has been incredibly welcoming. She glanced at the dancers swirling in the center of the room. Though I must admit, I haven't had a chance to dance yet. Yates hesitated, then set his cup down on a nearby table. Would you care to remedy that? Priscilla placed her hand in his outstretched one, trying to ignore the curious glances from around the room as the sheriff led her to the dance floor. The band had just begun a waltz, and Yates placed his hand respectfully at her waist as they joined the other couples. I should warn you, he said as they began to move, I'm not particularly accomplished at this. Despite his disclaimer, Yates guided her smoothly through the steps, his large hand warm against her back. Priscilla found herself surprisingly comfortable in his arms, more so than she had been with any dancing partner in Boston. You seem to be managing quite well, she observed. A hint of color appeared on his tanned cheeks. My mother insisted I learn. said no son of hers would be completely uncivilized even in the territories. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, he agreed, a shadow passing over his features. She passed when I was 15. Fever took her one winter. I'm sorry, Priscilla said softly. They danced in silence for a moment before Yates spoke again. What about your family? Do they approve of your adventure out west? It was Priscilla's turn to feel discomfort. Not particularly. My father wanted me to marry a business associate of his, a man 30 years my senior. When I refused, things became difficult at home. Understanding flashed in Yates's eyes. So you ran. I prefer to think of it as seeking my own path, she countered. Teaching has always been my passion. Here I can do that without my father's disapproval overshadowing everything. The music ended and they stepped apart, though Yates kept hold of her hand a moment longer than necessary. I hope Eagle Pass proves to be the fresh start you're looking for, Miss Stanton. Before she could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. A young boy, no more than 12, burst into the hall, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Sheriff," he cried, spotting Yates. "Come quick. Pa sent me riders coming from the east, at least 6 of them. Says they look like the Barton gang." The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. Yates was already moving, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "Everyone stay calm," he commanded, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. "Hutchins, Peterson with me. The rest of you stay here." He paused at the door, his eyes finding Priscilla's across the room. Something unspoken passed between them before he disappeared into the night. The celebration dissolved into worried clusters of conversation. Priscilla learned from the whispers around her that the Barton gang was a notorious group of outlaws who had been terrorizing settlements across the territory for months. "Robbed the bank in Tucson last month," one man informed her grimly. "Shot the teller who tried to stop them." "What will they want here?" Priscilla asked, fear rising in her throat. "Money, horses, whatever they can take," Mrs. Holloway replied, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry. "The stage came through yesterday with the mine payroll. It's in the bank safe." Time crawled as they waited for news. Some families with young children slipped away to their homes, while others elected to remain together in the town hall, drawing comfort from numbers. Priscilla found herself unable to sit still, moving restlessly between the windows, straining to see or hear anything from outside. It was nearly midnight when the sound of gunfire shattered the tense silence. Several women screamed, and Mayor Thompson urged everyone away from the windows. More shots followed, then shouting, though the words were indistinguishable. Priscilla's heart hammered in her chest. Somewhere out there, Yates was facing armed criminals, possibly fighting for his life. The thought bothered her more than she could explain, given how briefly she had known him. The gunfire eventually ceased, but the uncertainty remained. It was another half hour before the door opened and Yates entered, followed by his deputies. A collective gasp went up at the sight of blood staining his shirt sleeve. "It's over," he announced wearily. "We got 2 of them. The others fled, but they won't get far. Rangers have been notified." Priscilla pushed through the crowd toward him. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. Yates looked down at the bloodstain as if noticing it for the first time. "Just a graze. I've had worse." Despite his protest, Priscilla insisted on examining the wound. "Mrs. Holloway produced a first aid kit, and soon Priscilla was cleaning and bandaging Yates's arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You have experience with this," he observed as she worked. "I volunteered at a hospital in Boston," she explained. After the war, there were still many wounded veterans needing care. When she finished, their eyes met, and Priscilla became acutely aware of his closeness, of the way his gaze lingered on her face. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Mayor Thompson's voice broke the spell. 3 cheers for Sheriff Monroe and his men. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Yates stepped away from Priscilla to acknowledge the town's gratitude. The celebration gradually resumed, though with a subdued quality after the night's excitement. It was well past midnight when the social finally wound down. Yates offered to walk Priscilla back to the boarding house, and she gratefully accepted, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. "I apologize that your welcome party was disrupted," he said as they walked down the quiet street. "It's hardly your fault," Priscilla replied. "And I suppose it was an authentic frontier welcome, a dance and a gunfight all in one evening." Yates chuckled, the sound warm in the cool night air. "Not quite what we had planned." They reached the boarding house and Priscilla turned to face him. "Thank you for protecting the town tonight. That was very brave." "Just doing my job, Miss Stanton," she smiled softly. "I think after tonight you might call me Priscilla." "Priscilla," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "Good night, then." "Good night, Yates." As she watched him walk away, Priscilla acknowledged to herself that her feelings for the sheriff were rapidly developing into something more than mere gratitude or friendship. Whether that was wise in her position, as the town's new teacher remained to be seen. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for Priscilla's first day of teaching. She arrived at the schoolhouse early, arranging her limited supplies and writing a welcome message on the small blackboard. The children began arriving just before 8, some excited, others nervous, a few clearly reluctant. Priscilla greeted each one with a warm smile, learning names and trying to gauge their existing knowledge. By noon, she had a better understanding of the challenge before her. The students' education levels varied wildly. Some of the older children could barely read, while a few younger ones showed surprising aptitude. But all seemed willing to learn, and Priscilla felt a growing determination to give them the education they deserved. As the children filed out for the lunch break, Priscilla was surprised to see Yates approaching, a small package in his hand. "Sheriff," she greeted him, conscious of curious eyes watching from the schoolyard. "Miss Stanton, how's your first day going?" "Challenging but rewarding," she replied honestly. "I have my work cut out for me, but these children have so much potential." Yates nodded, then held out the package. "I thought you might need this. Found it in a drawer at the office." Unwrapping the paper, Priscilla discovered a small brass bell. "For calling the children in from recess," Yates explained. "The last teacher, the last person who tried teaching left it behind." Priscilla was touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you, this will be very useful." "The town council meeting is tonight," he added. "They'd like you to attend, give your initial impressions of the school needs." "Of course," Priscilla agreed. "What time?" 7 at the town hall. "I can escort you if you'd like." She smiled at his offer. "That would be lovely." The afternoon session went more smoothly than the morning, and Priscilla dismissed her students with a sense of accomplishment. She returned to the boarding house to refresh herself before the council meeting, changing into a clean blouse and skirt and re-pinning her hair. Yates arrived precisely at 6:30, dressed in his usual sheriff's attire, but with a freshly trimmed beard and combed hair. They walked to the town hall together, discussing the day's events. "The Miller boy seems bright," Yates commented. "His father will be pleased to hear that." "You know the families well," Priscilla observed. Yates shrugged. "Small town. Everyone knows everyone. Makes my job easier most times, harder others." The council meeting was more informal than Priscilla expected. 8 men, including Mayor Thompson and Yates, sat around a large table, with chairs for spectators arranged along the walls. A few townspeople were present. mostly parents of school-age children. When it came time for Priscilla to speak, she presented a clear assessment of the school's needs: more books, proper maps, additional slates for students who couldn't afford their own, and repairs to the roof before the rainy season. Mayor Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "We've set aside funds for the school, Miss Stanton. Make a detailed list, and we'll see what we can provide." The meeting moved on to other town business, and Priscilla found herself observing the dynamics between the council members. Yates spoke rarely, but when he did, others listened attentively. It was clear he commanded respect beyond his role as sheriff. Afterward, as they walked back under a sky full of stars, Priscilla asked, "Have you always wanted to be sheriff?" Yates was quiet for a moment before answering. "No. Wanted to be a rancher when I was younger, had dreams of my own spread." "What changed?" "My father died with his badge on," Yates said simply. "Someone had to step up. Town needed protection. You gave up your dream for the town." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Some dreams change. What about you?" "Always wanted to teach," Priscilla nodded. "Since I was a girl. My mother was a teacher before she married. She used to say education was the greatest gift you could give a child." "Your mother sounds wise, too," Yates said, echoing her earlier comment about his own mother. They reached the boarding house all too soon. Priscilla found herself reluctant to end their conversation, to go inside away from this man who intrigued her more with each encounter. "Thank you for escorting me," she said, lingering on the porch steps. Yates removed his hat, holding it before him. "Priscilla," he began, then hesitated. "Yes. I was wondering if you might like to join me for dinner tomorrow, at the hotel restaurant. It's not fancy, but the food's good." Priscilla's heart quickened at the invitation. "I would enjoy that very much." His smile was brief but genuine. "I'll call for you at 6 then. I look forward to it." As she prepared for bed that night, Priscilla acknowledged that she was looking forward to dinner with Yates far more than was proper for a woman who had known a man less than a week. But there was something about him, his quiet strength, his sense of duty, the gentleness beneath his stern exterior, that drew her to him in a way she had never experienced before. The following day passed in a blur of lessons and exercises. Priscilla found it difficult to keep her mind focused on teaching when her thoughts kept straying to the evening ahead. Was this truly a courting dinner, or merely a friendly gesture to the town's new teacher? By 6 o'clock, she was ready in her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the hazel of her eyes. Mrs. Holloway had given her a knowing smile as she descended the stairs, but made no comment beyond wishing her a pleasant evening. Yates arrived punctually, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, a dark gray with a matching vest and crisp white shirt. His usual gun belt was replaced by a more discreet holster, though Priscilla noted he still wore his badge. "You look beautiful," he said with such straightforward honesty that Priscilla felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The hotel restaurant was indeed modest by Boston standards, but the tablecloths were clean, and the lamps cast a warm glow over the half-dozen tables. Several diners nodded greetings as Yates led Priscilla to a table in the corner. "Everyone's watching," Priscilla observed quietly as they sat down. "Small town," Yates reminded her, a hint of amusement in his voice. "They'll have something new to talk about tomorrow." Dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, with apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed more easily than Priscilla had anticipated, moving from town gossip to books they had read, to childhood memories. "So, no siblings?" Yates asked as they lingered over coffee. Priscilla shook her head. "Just me. My mother had difficulties after I was born." "What about you?" "Had a brother. Younger. Died of typhoid when he was 10. Yates's face momentarily darkened with the memory. It's been just me since my father passed. It must be lonely sometimes, Priscilla said softly. Yates met her eyes, his gaze steady. It can be. Less so recently. The implication of his words hung between them, and Priscilla found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his blue eyes. Something was building between them, something unexpected and powerful. Their moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of one of Yates's deputies at their table, his expression urgent. "Sorry to disturb you, Sheriff, but there's trouble at the saloon. Randall's drunk again, threatening to shoot anyone who looks at him wrong." Yates rose immediately, his expression shifting from the warm openness of moments before to professional concern. "I'll handle it. Please see Miss Stanton safely back to the boarding house." He turned to Priscilla, genuine regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry. Duty calls." "I understand," she assured him, though disappointment settled in her chest. "Be careful." "Always am," he replied, then surprised her by briefly taking her hand and squeezing it before departing. The deputy, a young man named Thomas, escorted her back to the boarding house in awkward silence. Priscilla's thoughts remained with Yates, hoping he would resolve the situation without violence. She was sitting in the boarding house parlor with a book she couldn't focus on when a knock came at the door just after 9. Mrs. Holloway answered it, and moments later, Yates appeared in the parlor doorway. Priscilla rose quickly. "Is everything all right?" "Randall's sleeping it off in a cell," Yates confirmed. "No shots fired, just a lot of shouting and posturing. I'm glad no one was hurt." He stepped further into the room, removing his hat. "I wanted to apologize properly for cutting our evening short." "There's no need," Priscilla assured him. "It's your job. Still, I'd like to make it up to you." Yates hesitated, then continued. "The weather's supposed to be fine Sunday. I thought perhaps you might like to go for a ride. I could show you some of the countryside around Eagle Pass." The invitation brought a smile to Priscilla's lips. "I'd like that very much." "Good." He seemed relieved at her acceptance. "I'll arrange for a gentle horse for you." Around 10, after he left, Priscilla found Mrs. Holloway watching her with twinkling eyes. "The sheriff seems quite taken with you, dear." "We're just friends," Priscilla protested weakly. Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile widened. "If you say so, dear. Just remember, Yates Monroe hasn't shown this much interest in any woman since he pinned on that badge 5 years ago." The remainder of the week passed quickly, as Priscilla settled into her teaching routine. She began to know her students better, which ones needed extra help with reading, which excelled at arithmetic, which needed a firm hand to stay focused. She saw Yates only in passing, a nod and smile exchanged as their paths crossed in town. Each brief encounter reinforced her growing anticipation for Sunday's ride. When Sunday morning arrived, Priscilla dressed in her practical riding skirt and jacket. She had learned to ride in Boston, though opportunities had been limited in the city. The idea of galloping freely across the open desert held considerable appeal. Yates arrived at the boarding house leading 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a smaller bay mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," he said as he helped Priscilla mount. "Belongs to the Miller family, but they were happy to lend her for the day. She's steady and sweet-tempered." Priscilla stroked the mare's neck, immediately taking a liking to the gentle animal. "She's beautiful." They rode at an easy pace out of town, Yates leading them along a well-worn trail that followed the creek. Once past the last outlying farms, the landscape opened up dramatically, rolling hills dotted with saguaro cacti, mesquite trees, and occasional patches of wildflowers that had sprung up after recent rains. "It's breathtaking," Priscilla said, taking in the vast expanse of sky and land. "So different from Massachusetts." Takes some getting used to, Yates acknowledged. All this open space, but it grows on you. They rode for nearly an hour before reaching a small plateau overlooking a valley. A cluster of cottonwood trees provided shade near a bend in the creek, creating a perfect resting spot. Yates dismounted and helped Priscilla from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. He spread a blanket in the shade and unpacked a simple picnic lunch from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried apples, and a canteen of cool water. As they ate, Yates pointed out landmarks in the distance: the silver mine that had brought prosperity to Eagle Pass, the mountains that marked the Mexican border, the trail to Tucson. "How did you end up in Eagle Pass?" Priscilla asked, genuinely curious about his history. Yates leaned back against a tree trunk, stretching his long legs before him. "My father brought us here after the war. He'd served in the Union Army, came back changed, said he needed space, clean air, heard about opportunities in the territories. And your mother agreed to this adventure." "She'd have followed him anywhere," Yates said with a soft smile. "They had that kind of love. They sound wonderful. They were." He turned his gaze to her. "What about your parents? You mentioned your father wanted you to marry his business associate, but what about your mother? What would she have thought of you coming west?" Priscilla sighed, plucking a blade of grass. "My mother passed away 3 years ago. She was always more understanding than my father. I think she might have supported my decision even while worrying about me. And now, do you regret coming?" She met his eyes directly. Not for a moment. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken emotions. Yates shifted closer, his hand coming to rest beside hers on the blanket, their fingers nearly touching. "Priscilla," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I know you haven't been in Eagle Pass long, but I find myself—" A distant gunshot interrupted his words, both of them tensing at the sound. Yates was on his feet in an instant, hand on his pistol as he scanned the horizon. "Probably just a hunter," he said after a moment, though his posture remained alert. "But we should head back. It'll be getting dark in a few hours." The intimate moment was broken, and Priscilla felt a twinge of disappointment as they packed up the remains of their picnic. Whatever Yates had been about to say would have to wait for another time. The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Eagle Pass, Yates slowed his horse to ride alongside her. "I enjoyed today," he said simply. "As did I," Priscilla replied, offering him a smile. "Thank you for showing me the countryside. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. I'd like that." When they reached the boarding house, Yates helped her dismount, his strong hands easily lifting her from the saddle. As her feet touched the ground, she found herself standing very close to him, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. For a breathless moment, Priscilla thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and he leaned slightly forward. But then he seemed to recollect himself, stepping back with a small cough. "I should get the horses back," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Good night, Priscilla." "Good night, Yates." She watched him lead both horses away, her heart still beating rapidly from their near kiss. Something was definitely developing between them, something that both excited and frightened her with its intensity. The following weeks settled into a pleasant routine. Priscilla taught during the day, gradually implementing improvements as supplies arrived from Tucson. The students were making progress, some faster than others, but all showing dedication that warmed her heart. Yates became a regular caller at the boarding house, sometimes just stopping by to check on her, other times inviting her for walks or meals. They were careful to maintain propriety, always meeting in public or under Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye, but the town quickly began to speculate about their relationship. "The Miller twins asked me today if you were going to be their new uncle," Priscilla told Yates one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. Yates nearly choked on his coffee. "What did you tell them?" "That it wasn't polite to ask such questions," she replied, hiding her smile behind her cup. A comfortable silence fell between them before Yates spoke again, his voice careful. "Would that be so terrible if people thought we were courting?" Priscilla's heart quickened. "No," she admitted softly. "It wouldn't be terrible at all." Their eyes met, and this time there was no mistaking the intention in Yates's gaze. He set his cup down and reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Priscilla, I know it hasn't been long, but I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your kindness, your courage, your determination. Everything about you." Priscilla found it difficult to breathe as he continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'd like to court you properly if you're willing." The simple, honest words touched her deeply. "I am willing," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Very much so." The smile that spread across Yates's face transformed his usually serious features, making him look younger and carefree. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their first kiss was gentle, a brief touch of lips that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through Priscilla's body. Yates drew back, searching her face for a reaction. What he saw must have reassured him, for he leaned in again, this time deepening the kiss. Priscilla's free hand moved to his shoulder, steadying herself as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. A discreet cough from the doorway brought them both back to reality. Mrs. Holloway stood there, her expression torn between amusement and propriety. "It's getting rather late," she said pointedly. Yates stood, a hint of color on his cheekbones. "Of course. My apologies, Mrs. Holloway." He turned to Priscilla, taking her hand and helping her to her feet. "May I call on you tomorrow?" "I would be disappointed if you didn't," she replied, happiness bubbling through her veins. After Yates left, Mrs. Holloway fixed Priscilla with a knowing look. "Well, it seems the sheriff has declared his intentions." Priscilla couldn't suppress her smile. "It seems he has." The older woman's expression softened. "He's a good man, Priscilla, one of the best in these parts." "I know," Priscilla said simply, and she did know. Despite the relatively short time she had known Yates, she recognized his fundamental decency, his sense of honor, his kindness beneath the stern exterior. Over the next month, their courtship progressed steadily. Yates called on her regularly, taking her for rides in the countryside, escorting her to church on Sundays, and occasionally bringing small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers he had gathered, a delicate hairpin he had ordered from Tucson. The town watched their developing relationship with approval and, in some cases, relief. Several of the older women confided to Priscilla that they had worried about their sheriff being alone for so long. "Man needs a good woman," Mrs. Peterson told her after church one Sunday. "Especially a man with responsibilities like Yates has." Priscilla was happier than she had ever been in Boston. Her students were thriving, the town had embraced her, and she was falling deeply in love with a man who seemed to return her feelings with equal intensity. But as October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hint of autumn to the desert, a shadow fell over their contentment. Priscilla was in the schoolhouse one afternoon, grading essays while the children enjoyed their recess, when Mayor Thompson appeared at her door, his expression grave. "Miss Stanton, could I speak with you privately?" Concerned by his serious tone, Priscilla set aside her work. "Of course, Mayor." "Is something wrong?" He closed the door and removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. "I'm afraid I've received a rather troubling letter from Boston." Priscilla's stomach clenched. "From my father," Mayor Thompson nodded. "Sebastian Stanton. He claims you left without his permission and that he's coming to bring you home." He paused, looking uncomfortable. He implies you were not entirely truthful about your situation. Cold dread washed over Priscilla. What exactly does he say? That you were engaged to be married when you fled. That you stole family heirlooms and money. That's not true. Priscilla stood abruptly, indignation overriding her fear. I refused the marriage he arranged, and I took only what was rightfully mine: jewelry my mother left specifically to me, and money I had saved from my own work. Mayor Thompson raised a placating hand. I believe you, Miss Stanton. Your character has been evident since you arrived, but your father seems determined, and he has apparently engaged a private detective to accompany him. Priscilla sank back into her chair, her mind racing. When will they arrive? The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. If they traveled directly, they could be here within days. After the mayor left, Priscilla dismissed her students early, too distracted to continue teaching. She needed to speak with Yates, to explain everything before her father arrived with his accusations and demands. She found him at the sheriff's office, going over wanted posters. The smile that lit his face when he saw her quickly faded as he registered her distress. "What's happened?" he asked, immediately rising and coming around his desk. Priscilla told him everything about her father's controlling nature, his determination to marry her off to his elderly business partner, her desperate plan to escape to a place where she could be independent. "I didn't steal anything," she insisted, tears threatening. "But my father believes everything of value belongs to him, including me." Yates listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When she finished, he took her hands in his. "You want to leave?" he asked directly. "Before they arrive, I could arrange passage to California, give you enough money to start over." The offer touched her deeply that his first thought was for her freedom, her wishes, but Priscilla shook her head. "No, I'm tired of running. Besides, this is my home now. I have my students, my friends." She squeezed his hands. "You." Relief flickered across Yates's features, followed by determination. "Then we'll face this together. Your father has no legal right to force you back. You're of age, and this is Arizona territory, not Massachusetts." His confidence steadied her. "Thank you." Yates hesitated, then said carefully, "There's one thing we could do that would make it even harder for your father to interfere." "What's that?" "We could get married." The words were direct, without embellishment. "Not just for that reason," he added quickly. "I was planning to ask you anyway, just not like this." Priscilla's breath caught. "You were," Yates nodded, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. "I love you, Priscilla. I think I have since I found you stranded in the desert. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Joy momentarily overshadowed her worry. "I love you too," she whispered, "but I don't want to marry in haste out of fear of my father." "Fair enough," Yates agreed, "but remember the offer stands regardless of when your father arrives." 3 days later, a stage arrived from Tucson carrying 2 passengers: Sebastian Stanton, a tall, imposing man with steel gray hair and cold eyes, and James Blackwell, a sharp-featured man who Priscilla assumed was the private detective. Word reached the schoolhouse before the men themselves did. Mrs. Miller arrived breathless at the classroom door, informing Priscilla that her father had taken rooms at the hotel and was asking directions to the school. Priscilla dismissed her class early for the second time that week, her hands trembling as she gathered her things. She had just closed her desk when the schoolhouse door opened, and her father stood framed in the doorway, his expression a mixture of anger and satisfaction. "Priscilla," he said coldly, "you've led us on quite a chase." She straightened her spine, determined not to show fear. "Father, I wish I could say it's good to see you, but we both know that would be a lie." Sebastian Stanton entered the schoolroom fully, followed by Blackwell, who remained by the door as if guarding against escape. "This childish rebellion has gone on long enough," her father said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You have responsibilities in Boston. Mr. Carmichael has been most patient, but even his patience has limits." "I'm not returning to Boston," Priscilla stated firmly. "And I'm certainly not marrying Mr. Carmichael. I have a life here, a position I value." Her father's laugh was dismissive. "Playing teacher to a bunch of frontier brats. Don't be absurd. You're a Stanton. You have obligations to your family name." "The only obligation I have is to myself," Priscilla countered, "and to the community that has welcomed me." Sebastian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I've heard about your community, specifically your inappropriate relationship with the local lawman." Before Priscilla could respond, the door opened again, and Yates stepped into the schoolroom. His badge gleamed on his chest, and his expression was professionally neutral as he surveyed the scene. "Is everything all right here, Miss Stanton?" he asked, though his eyes never left Sebastian. "Sheriff Monroe," Priscilla said, relief washing through her. "Yes, thank you. This is my father, Sebastian Stanton, and his associate, Mr. Blackwell." Yates nodded curtly. "Mr. Stanton, Mayor Thompson informed me of your arrival. Welcome to Eagle Pass." Sebastian's gaze raked over Yates with obvious disdain. "So you're the man who's been taking advantage of my daughter's naivety." Anger flashed in Yates's eyes, but his voice remained controlled. "I assure you, sir, my intentions toward Miss Stanton are honorable. More importantly, she is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions." "She is my daughter," Sebastian snapped, "and she is returning to Boston with me, today." Yates moved to stand beside Priscilla, a silent statement of support. "That will be Miss Stanton's choice to make, not yours." The tension in the small schoolroom was palpable. Blackwell shifted his weight, his hand moving toward his coat in a gesture Yates didn't miss. The sheriff's own hand drifted casually toward his holster. "I suggest," Yates continued evenly, "that we all take time to cool down. Mr. Stanton, you've had a long journey. Perhaps you'd like to rest at the hotel before continuing this conversation." Sebastian's jaw clenched, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. "Very well. Priscilla, we will discuss this further at dinner. 7 o'clock at the hotel restaurant." He turned to leave, then paused. "Alone, if you please. Your sheriff is not invited." After they departed, Priscilla sagged against her desk, the confrontation having drained her energy. Yates was immediately at her side, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" She nodded, drawing strength from his presence. "I will be. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Miller sent word," he explained. "I was worried he might try to force you to leave." "He still might," Priscilla said grimly. "You don't know how determined my father can be when he wants something." Yates's arm tightened around her. "He'll have to go through me first." That evening, Priscilla dressed carefully for dinner with her father, selecting a modest but elegant blue dress that reminded her she was no longer the frightened girl who had fled Boston. She was a respected teacher, a woman with her own mind and heart. Yates insisted on escorting her to the hotel, though he agreed to wait in the lobby during the meal. "Just in case," he said, his expression making it clear he didn't trust Sebastian Stanton. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty when Priscilla arrived, save for her father seated at a corner table. She noticed Blackwell positioned at the bar, watching the entrance like a hawk. "You're punctual, at least," Sebastian said as she sat down. "Your mother instilled that much in you." Priscilla ignored the barb. "Why are you really here, father? It can't just be concern for the family name. You never cared much for that when it came to your business dealings." Sebastian's eyes narrowed at her directness. "You've become insolent out here in this wasteland." "I've become myself," she corrected. "Free from your control." A waiter approached and they paused their conversation to order. Once they were alone again, Sebastian leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "You will return to Boston with me, Priscilla. Mr. Carmichael is still willing to marry you despite your indiscretions. The alternative is to be cut off completely, no money, no family connection, nothing." "I've been living without your money for months," Priscilla pointed out. "I have a salary here, a position of respect. For how long?" Sebastian countered. "Once word spreads about your improper relationship with the sheriff, do you think these frontier Puritans will still want you teaching their children?" Priscilla felt her cheeks warm with anger. "There is nothing improper about my relationship with Yates. He is a good, honorable man who respects me." "Yates, is it?" Her father's voice dripped with disdain. "How familiar. Does he know about your condition?" Priscilla froze, her blood running cold. "What condition?" Sebastian's smile was cruel. "Your mother's instability. The doctors were quite clear it runs in families, especially female lines. Do you think your sheriff would still want you if he knew you might end up in an asylum like she did?" "That's not true," Priscilla whispered, her hands clenching in her lap. "Mother wasn't insane. She was depressed after losing the baby, and you locked her away rather than deal with her grief." "She was unmanageable," Sebastian said dismissively. "Just as you're becoming unmanageable, perhaps history will repeat itself." Fear gripped Priscilla's heart. Her mother's treatment at the asylum had broken her spirit, reduced her to a shell of her former vibrant self. Could her father truly commit her to such a fate? "You can't," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm of sound mind and we're not in Massachusetts. You have no authority here." Sebastian leaned back, suddenly casual. "Perhaps not legally, but accidents happen in these lawless territories. Or perhaps your sheriff might meet with an unfortunate incident. Blackwell is quite resourceful." The threat against Yates made Priscilla's blood run cold. She knew her father well enough to recognize it wasn't an idle threat. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Return to Boston willingly," Sebastian replied. "Marry Carmichael as planned. In return, I'll ensure your friend remains unharmed." Priscilla felt trapped, the walls closing in around her just as they had in Boston. "I need time to think," she managed. "You have until tomorrow noon," her father said, rising from the table before their food had even arrived. "I'll expect your decision then." Priscilla remained seated, too shaken to move as Sebastian strode from the restaurant. She didn't notice Yates approaching until he slid into the chair her father had vacated. "What happened?" he asked, his expression concerned. "You're pale as a ghost." She couldn't bring herself to repeat her father's threats, especially not the one against Yates. "He wants me to return to Boston, to marry Mr. Carmichael." Yates's jaw tightened. "And if you refuse, he'll make things difficult," Priscilla said vaguely. Yates reached across the table, taking her trembling hands in his. "Priscilla, whatever he's threatened, we can face it together. I won't let him hurt you." Tears welled in her eyes at his unwavering support. "It's not me I'm worried about," understanding dawned in his eyes. "He threatened me." Reluctantly, Priscilla nodded. "He has this man, Blackwell, a detective, but I suspect he's more than that." Yates's expression hardened. "I've dealt with men like Blackwell before. Your father is trying to intimidate you, using me as leverage. What if he's serious? I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Yates assured her firmly, "but I think it's time we discussed our options more seriously." They left the hotel, Yates keeping a protective arm around Priscilla as they walked through the darkening streets. He led her not to the boarding house, but to his own small home at the edge of town, a modest cabin that she had never entered before. "It's not much," he said as he lit a lamp, illuminating the simple but neat interior, "but it's mine. And it could be ours. Priscilla looked around at the sparse furnishings: a table with 2 chairs, a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes, a stove in one corner, and a door leading to what she presumed was a bedroom. "Yates, what are you suggesting?" He took her hands, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Marry me, tonight. Reverend Johnson would do it, even at this hour. As your husband, I'd have legal standing to protect you from your father." Priscilla's heart raced at the proposal. "You're asking me to marry you to protect me from my father?" "No," Yates said firmly. "I'm asking you to marry me because I love you more than I ever thought possible, because I want to spend my life with you. The timing is because of your father, but the reason is entirely about us." Tears filled Priscilla's eyes again, but this time from happiness rather than fear. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Yates's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I'll go get the Reverend," he murmured. "Will you wait here? It's safer than the boarding house if Blackwell is watching." Priscilla nodded, though anxiety still lingered in her chest. "Be careful." After Yates left, Priscilla paced the small cabin, torn between elation at the prospect of marrying the man she loved and fear of her father's reaction. Would marriage truly protect her from Sebastian's machinations, or would it only inflame his anger further? Nearly an hour passed before the door opened, and Yates returned with not only Reverend Johnson but also Mayor Thompson and Mrs. Holloway, the latter carrying a small bouquet of autumn wildflowers. "For the bride," Mrs. Holloway said, pressing the flowers into Priscilla's hands. "Every woman should have flowers at her wedding, even one arranged in haste." The simple ceremony took place in Yates's small living room, with the mayor and Mrs. Holloway as witnesses. Despite the urgency driving their decision, Priscilla found herself moved by the solemnity of the moment, by the depth of emotion in Yates's voice as he repeated his vows. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he had explained, preserved for this moment. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that Priscilla momentarily forgot all her fears, lost in the knowledge that she was now Mrs. Yates Monroe, bound to this good man in the eyes of both law and God. After their guests departed with promises of discretion, until the newlyweds decided how to handle Sebastian Stanton, Yates and Priscilla found themselves alone in what was now their home. "Are you all right?" Yates asked gently, noting her distracted expression. Priscilla nodded, twisting the unfamiliar ring on her finger. "Just wondering what happens next. My father won't simply accept this and leave." "No, he won't," Yates agreed, his expression resolute. "But now we face him together as husband and wife. He has no legal claim on you anymore." That night, as they shared their first intimacy as a married couple, Priscilla found comfort and strength in Yates's embrace. Whatever challenges her father presented, they would meet them united. Morning brought a knock at their door just as they were finishing breakfast. Yates opened it to find Mayor Thompson standing there, his expression troubled. "Your father's at the schoolhouse," he told Priscilla without preamble, "making quite a scene, telling anyone who'll listen that you're, well, not fit to teach their children." Priscilla felt the blood drain from her face. "He's telling them about my mother." Yates's arm came around her protectively. "What about her mother?" Priscilla had never told him the full story, too ashamed and fearful of his reaction, but there was no hiding it now. "My mother suffered from melancholia after losing a baby, my would-be younger brother. Instead of supporting her through her grief, my father had her committed to an asylum. He's claiming I inherited her instability." Understanding and anger flashed across Yates's features. That's his game. Trying to turn the town against you with lies about your mental health. Not entirely lies, Priscilla admitted quietly. I did suffer from deep sadness after Mother died. Father called it the family affliction and used it as another reason I should marry quickly, before I became unmanageable. Yates cupped her face in his hands, his gaze intense. Listen to me. Grief is not madness. Your father used your mother's suffering and yours as a weapon to control you. I won't let him do that here. The fierce protection in his voice gave Priscilla courage. We should go to the schoolhouse. Together. By the time they arrived, a small crowd had gathered outside the building. Sebastian Stanton stood on the schoolhouse steps, addressing parents and townspeople with the smooth authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention. In her family for generations, he was saying as Priscilla and Yates approached. Her mother died in an asylum, and Priscilla herself has shown similar tendencies. Do you really want such a person influencing your children? That's enough, Stanton, Yates called out, his voice carrying across the schoolyard. The crowd parted to let them through, curious eyes taking in their linked hands and Priscilla's new ring. Sebastian's gaze narrowed when he spotted the wedding band. What have you done? He demanded, descending the steps to confront them. What you should have done years ago, Yates replied evenly. Supported her choices instead of trying to control them. Sebastian's face flushed with anger. This is preposterous. The marriage can't possibly be legal. I assure you it is, Mayor Thompson said, stepping forward from the crowd. I witnessed it myself, along with Reverend Johnson and Mrs. Holloway. Sebastian turned his attention to Priscilla, his voice lowering to a threatening hiss. You think this changes anything? I can still have you declared incompetent. One telegram to Dr. Harriman in Boston. Try it, Yates interrupted, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his holster. But understand this. If you or your hired man come near my wife again with threats, you'll answer to me. The menace in his tone was unmistakable. Sebastian took an involuntary step back, suddenly aware that he was far from the Boston society where his wealth commanded respect. People of Eagle Pass, Priscilla called out, addressing the gathered crowd. I owe you an explanation. My father claims I'm unstable because my mother suffered from melancholia after losing a child. He had her committed to an asylum where she received treatments that ultimately broke her spirit. Murmurs ran through the crowd as she continued, her voice growing stronger. I came west not just for adventure, but to escape the same fate. To find a place where I could be judged by my own character and actions, not by my father's wealth or my family's history. She looked around at the faces watching her students, their parents, merchants she greeted each day, neighbors who had welcomed her into their community. You've known me for almost 3 months now. You've entrusted me with your children's education. If you believe I'm unfit to continue as your teacher because of my father's accusations, I will understand. But I hope you'll judge me by what you've seen of me, not by his words. Silence fell over the schoolyard as her statement hung in the air. Then Mrs. Miller stepped forward, her twin boys at her sides. My boys have learned more from you in 3 months than they did in the entire year before you came, she said firmly. I don't care what happened in Boston. You're our teacher now. Others began to voice their agreement, stepping forward to express their support. Mayor Thompson raised his hands for quiet. I believe I speak for the town council when I say Miss Stanton, Mrs. Monroe now, has proven herself an excellent teacher and valuable member of our community. Unless anyone has actual evidence of unfitness, not just hearsay from back east, her position is secure. Sebastian looked around at the wall of supportive faces and realized he had lost. His authority, so absolute in Boston, meant nothing in this frontier town. "This isn't over," he warned Priscilla before stalking away, Blackwell following at his heels. The crowd gradually dispersed, many stopping to congratulate Priscilla and Yates on their marriage before returning to their daily activities. When they were finally alone in the schoolhouse, Priscilla sagged against her desk, emotionally drained by the confrontation. "You think he'll really leave?" she asked Yates. "Not immediately," he replied honestly. "Men like your father don't admit defeat easily. But he'll realize eventually that he has no power here." His prediction proved accurate. Sebastian and Blackwell remained in Eagle Pass for another week, making various threats and attempting to bribe town officials to support their cause. When these efforts failed, Sebastian made one final attempt to see Priscilla, arriving at the schoolhouse after classes had ended. "This marriage is a mistake," he told her bluntly. "He'll tire of you eventually, especially when he realizes the burden he's taken on." "The only burden in my life was you," Priscilla replied calmly. "Yates loves me for who I am, not for what I can do for him." Sebastian's expression hardened. "You've made your choice. Don't expect any support from me when it all falls apart." "I haven't expected anything from you in a very long time, Father." With those parting words, Sebastian Stanton left Eagle Pass the next morning on the eastbound stage, taking his threats and Blackwell with him. Life gradually returned to normal, or rather, a new normal for Priscilla. She continued teaching while adjusting to married life with Yates. They settled into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, discussing their days, and falling more deeply in love with each passing week. Winter arrived, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow to Eagle Pass. Christmas was celebrated with a town gathering, the schoolhouse decorated with pine boughs and handmade ornaments by the children. As they walked home from the celebration, snowflakes just beginning to fall gently around them, Yates squeezed Priscilla's hand. "Happy?" he asked. She nodded, leaning into his warmth. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, even though our beginning was unconventional," Priscilla laughed softly. "Everything about us has been unconventional. A broken wagon in the desert, a rescue by a handsome sheriff, a hasty wedding to escape my father's clutches. It's like something from one of those dime novels." Yates chuckled, pulling her closer as they walked. "When you put it that way, I suppose it has been rather dramatic." "But perfect in its own way," Priscilla added, looking up at the man who had become her protector, her partner, her love. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to the desert landscape and a new development in their lives. Priscilla was expecting their first child. The news was met with joy not just by Yates, but by the entire town, with Mrs. Holloway immediately beginning to knit baby clothes and Mayor Thompson promising the town would build an addition to their small cabin. "I never thought I'd have this," Priscilla confessed one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of orange and pink. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded abdomen, Yates's larger one covering it protectively. "Have what?" he asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. "This happiness, this sense of belonging." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with emotion. "When I left Boston, I was just running away from one life. I never imagined I'd find another so much richer, so much more authentic." Yates leaned forward, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "When I found you in the desert that day, I was just doing my job. I never imagined I was finding my future." "You ever regret it?" Priscilla asked, a hint of her old insecurity surfacing. "Marrying me in such haste?" "Taking on my father's anger?" "Not for a single moment," Yates replied without hesitation. "I'd face 100 Sebastian Stantons to have you as my wife." Their son was born in late October, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a dusting of his mother's brown hair. They named him William, after Yates's father, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Priscilla's maternal grandfather. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby's arrival. Priscilla continued teaching, bringing little William with her to school where the older girls delighted in helping care for him between lessons. Yates proved to be a devoted father, often carrying his son around town while making his rounds as sheriff. The years passed, bringing growth and change to both the town and their family. Eagle Pass expanded as the railroad arrived, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Priscilla established a proper school board and eventually hired assistant teachers as the student population grew. 3 years after William's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Lillian, who possessed her mother's quiet determination and her father's steady courage. The family moved from their small cabin to a larger house on a modest piece of land at the edge of town, where Yates could keep horses and Priscilla could have the garden she had always wanted. In the spring of 1888, 10 years after Priscilla's wagon had broken down in the desert, a letter arrived from Boston. Sebastian Stanton had passed away, leaving his entire estate to his only daughter and her children, with a brief note expressing regret for his actions. "Do you think he really changed his mind about us?" Priscilla asked Yates as they sat on their porch that evening, the letter between them. Yates considered the question thoughtfully. "People can change, even stubborn ones like your father. Maybe seeing your happiness from afar made him realize what truly mattered." The inheritance brought financial security they had never expected, but both agreed that their life in Eagle Pass was too precious to abandon for Boston society. Instead, they used the money to establish a scholarship fund for local students who wished to continue their education beyond what the town school could provide. "What would you have done?" Priscilla asked Yates one night as they lay together in their bed, the sounds of their sleeping children coming from down the hall, "if you hadn't found me that day in the desert." Yates pulled her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. "I would have kept looking," he said simply. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." "Like a broken wagon and an overprotective father," Priscilla teased. "Like any challenge life throws at us," Yates replied, his voice growing serious. "Finding you was the easy part, Priscilla. Loving you that's been the joy of my life." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Priscilla reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a frightened young woman fleeing her father's control to a confident teacher, mother, and wife deeply embedded in a community she loved. Her wagon breaking down in the desert had seemed like disaster at the time. But as with so many apparent misfortunes, it had led her exactly where she needed to be, to a life rich with purpose and love, to the arms of a man who had simply wanted to take her home and had ended up giving her a home she had never dared to imagine. In the years that followed, whenever newcomers to Eagle Pass asked how the sheriff and the schoolteacher had met, Yates would smile that rare, full smile of his and say, "Her wagon broke down in the desert. I found her and said, 'Let me take you home. Best decision I ever made.'" And Priscilla, her eyes meeting his across whatever room they happened to be in, would smile back, still feeling that same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he had helped her onto his horse. "And I've been home ever since," she would add, knowing with absolute certainty that it was true.